1. The Whisper Under the Bed, a sleepover in Ohio gone wrong. The Girl in the Basement Window. The Haunting of Maple Street, Illinois. 3. Playtime in the Woods. The Vanishing Kids of Redwood, Oregon. Have you ever wondered what could go wrong during an innocent game in the woods? In Redwood, Oregon, a group of kids thought they were just playing hide-and-seek, but the forest had other plans. Strange whispers followed them, shadows moved where there shouldn't be any, and one by one they started disappearing. What started as laughter turned into sheer terror, and no one knew if they would ever make it out. Stay with me, because this is the chilling story of the Vanishing Kids of Redwood. If you want, I can also make equally gripping intros for the other two stories so your video hooks viewers from start to finish. 1. The Whisper Under the Bed, a sleepover in Ohio gone wrong. It all began on a chilly October evening in a quiet suburb of Ohio, where the leaves had already turned brilliant shades of orange and red, and the wind whispered secrets through the skeletal branches of the trees outside, giving the neighborhood an eerily alive feeling that no one could quite shake off. Especially the group of friends gathered at Emily's house for what was supposed to be a fun, innocent sleepover full of movies, popcorn, and whispered secrets shared under the soft glow of a nightlight. The night had started just like any other, with laughter echoing down the hallways as the kids sneaked snacks from the kitchen, their giggles bouncing off the walls as they dared each other to tell ghost stories, each tale more terrifying than the last. But none of them truly prepared for what would unfold once the lights were out, and everyone was settled into their sleeping bags on the floor of Emily's bedroom, where shadows danced on the walls and the house seemed to exhale in a rhythm that matched the nervous excitement of the children, until it began. First, it was a soft, almost inaudible whisper that seemed to crawl from beneath the bed, like a secret being dragged up from the dark, and at first, they thought it was just Emily's little brother trying to scare them, or perhaps the wind slipping through the slightly open window. But as the whisper grew clearer, almost forming words they couldn't understand, their laughter turned into uneasy silence, eyes darting around the room, hearts pounding as they strained to hear, trying to convince themselves it was nothing, until one of them, Sarah, leaned over the edge of her sleeping bag, whispering a shaky, "Did you hear that?" And the whisper paused as if listening, and then it came again, this time distinctly saying, "Leave, now." In a voice so soft yet chilling, it sent shivers racing down their spines and froze them in place, paralyzed by a combination of fear and disbelief, wondering how something under a bed could speak, how it could know their names, and why it wanted them gone. A terror compounded by the sudden realization that the shadows under the bed were not just empty darkness, but shapes, vague at first, then forming into small, hunched figures, like children themselves, their eyes glinting with something unnatural, something hungry, and every instinct in their bodies screamed to run, to flee the room, but their legs refused to move, and the whispering continued, now joined by scratching sounds, soft, deliberate, and horrifyingly close, like fingernails dragging across wood, punctuated by sudden thuds that echoed through the quiet house as if whatever lived beneath the bed was testing the boundaries of its prison and preparing to rise. And in that moment, Emily's bravest friend, Jake, decided he had to see for himself. Inching closer to the bed, flashlight trembling in his hand, casting long, jittery beams across the room, catching glimpses of shapes that disappeared the moment he tried to focus on them, and just as he crouched down to peer under the bed, the temperature dropped, their breath misting in front of them, and the whisper escalated into a chorus of voices, overlapping and unintelligible, yet somehow forming a coherent warning. "Leave, before it's too late." And in the midst of their terror, the bed seemed to shift, a deep groaning sound as though the wooden frame was alive, moving beneath invisible weight. And then came a sudden sharp crack like the snapping of bones, and the children screamed, scrambling backwards, tripping over each other in the darkness, the nightlight flickering as if reacting to the horror, casting twisted shadows across the walls. And when they finally mustered the courage to look under the bed from a safer distance, there was nothing, only the empty space and the faint lingering echo of whispers, leaving them questioning if it had been real or just a shared nightmare. But the evidence was undeniable. Their footprints pressed into the dust under the bed, the scratches etched into the wood, and the faint outline of something moving away into the darkness beyond the bedroom door. And as they huddled together, shaking and whispering frantic theories about what they had seen, they heard it again, this time from the hallway outside, faint but unmistakable. "Next time, you won't get away." And panic overcame them. sending them flying from the room down the stairs and out the front door into the cold night, hearts racing, lungs burning, with the realization that the ordinary, familiar house of Emily's childhood had become a place of terror, a vessel for something they could not understand. And though they ran into the arms of their parents, breathless and terrified, the whispers followed them, haunting them in the silence of their homes, creeping into dreams, and shaping every shadow into potential horror, leaving scars on their memory that would last far beyond that fateful night. For the whisper under the bed was no ordinary ghost story. They had lived it, felt it, and knew that the darkness that lurked in the corners of their childhood world was patient, cunning, and always waiting for the next time the door was left open, the nightlight dimmed, and the innocent laughter of children drifted into the wrong room. Curse of the Girl in the Basement Window, The Haunting of Maple Street, Illinois. It all started in the quiet, tree-lined streets of Maple Street, Illinois, where every house looked picture-perfect, lawns neatly trimmed, and neighbors waving politely as children rode their bikes up and down the sidewalks. But one particular house, an old two-story Victorian at the end of the cul-de-sac, had always carried a reputation that made the local kids shiver. Stories whispered about a girl who had disappeared decades ago, never found yet somehow felt present in that house, and for 12-year-old Tommy, who had just moved in with his parents over the summer, the rumors were the perfect challenge to test his courage, especially since he loved exploring abandoned or slightly spooky places, and that basement window at the side of the house had always caught his eye, small and dusty, half hidden by overgrown ivy, almost beckoning him to look inside. And on the first night after moving in, as he unpacked his belongings and tried to get used to creaking floors and the occasional draft, he noticed a faint light flickering in the basement window, though all the lights in the house were turned off and curiosity got the better of him, whispering that maybe it was just a reflection, or a neighbor's passing car, or the imagination of a kid hungry for adventure. But the feeling of being watched crept over him, that prickling sensation at the back of the neck, and by the second night, he swore he saw a pale face staring out at him through the basement window, eyes wide, hollow, pleading, sending a chill that made his stomach knot and his limbs freeze, and when he told his parents, they laughed nervously, dismissing it as shadows or his imagination running wild. But Tommy couldn't shake it, especially when he started hearing soft, almost inaudible tapping on the window at night, like fingernails dragging lightly against glass, and sometimes a whisper, so faint he wasn't sure if he had imagined it, repeating his name at Tommy. "Tommy, come down." And the whisper grew more insistent with each night, laced with sorrow and urgency, a sound that clawed at his very sense of safety, making sleep impossible and each creak of the old house a potential threat. And then came the night when he finally saw her, the girl in the basement window, clearly visible in the dim glow, her hair long, stringy, and matted, her eyes hollow yet piercing, her lips moving silently in desperate, wordless cries, and Tommy, despite the terror gripping him, felt an odd pull, a strange mixture of fear and sympathy that urged him closer, and as he inched toward the window, each step creaking on the porch boards, the whisper became a full voice, trembling and fragile. "Help me, please." And suddenly the temperature dropped, his breath fogging in front of him, and the door to the basement rattled as though something inside was testing its confinement, sending a wave of panic crashing over him. Yet he couldn't turn away, frozen by the intensity of her gaze, and when he reached the window, pressed his forehead against the cold glass, he realized that the basement wasn't empty, shadows moving inside, small shapes darting and vanishing, and the voice, now joined by a chorus of whispers, begged him to enter, to find her, to free her from something unseen but undeniably malevolent. And Tommy, trembling, went inside, the basement door creaking loudly as he opened it, revealing a darkness so thick it seemed alive, pressing against him, making it hard to breathe. And as he descended the narrow stairs, the whispers grew louder, forming sentences that were half commands, half pleas, warning him of the danger yet urging him onward. And he saw her then, floating just above the floor, a translucent figure of a girl no older than he was, hair drifting as if underwater, eyes wide and filled with eternal sorrow, mouth opening and closing without sound. Yet he could hear her voice clearly in his mind, begging, guiding, and warning him all at once. And behind her, the shadows moved like living things, reaching out with dark, clawed fingers. And Tommy knew instinctively that these shadows were the ones keeping her trapped, feeding off fear, keeping her tethered to this world in torment. And as he stepped closer, one shadow lunged toward him, chilling him to the bone. But he remembered something his grandmother had once told him about courage being the only weapon against fear, and with a shaky, determined hand, he reached out. And in that moment, the girl's hand passed through his, cold as ice, and the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony, both desperate and pleading, warning that he had only moments to act before they would consume him as well. And in a flash of clarity, Tommy realized he had to touch the window, the source of the girl's tether, and as his fingers brushed the cold glass from inside, the shadows screamed, the basement shook, dust falling from the rafters, and the girl's form shimmered, brighter now, eyes finally softening, the voice in his mind whispering, "Thank you. I am free." And just as suddenly as it had begun, the basement fell silent, empty except for the echo of his own terrified breathing, and the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the basement window. And when Tommy ran to the front door and burst into the living room, his parents found him shaking, pale, unable to explain fully what had happened, only that the girl in the basement window was gone, freed from whatever had held her. And though the house seemed normal again, the neighborhood calm and serene, Tommy knew he had glimpsed something no child should ever see, something lingering just beyond the veil of ordinary reality. And in the following weeks, he noticed strange things, small footprints that appeared in the dust on the basement floor, whispers in the wind when he walked past the window, shadows that seemed to bow in acknowledgement. And though he was no longer afraid, he could never forget the girl in the basement window. Her story etched into his mind, a haunting reminder that some mysteries are real, some horrors are true, and some children never truly leave the places where they were trapped, waiting for someone brave enough to help them escape. And that night in Maple Street, Illinois, Tommy had been that someone, a young boy who faced the darkness and lived to tell the tale. But the memory of her hollow eyes, the cold touch of her hand, and the voices that whispered in his ears would follow him forever, a chilling reminder that some haunted houses are not just legends, and some ghosts do not rest until they are set free. The Playtime in the Woods, the Vanishing Kids of Redwood, Oregon. It all started one bright summer afternoon in the dense, towering forests of Redwood, Oregon, where the sunlight filtered through the thick canopy of ancient trees, casting long, shifting shadows on the forest floor, and a group of neighborhood kids no older than 10 or 11 decided to venture deeper than usual, armed with nothing more than their curiosity and a few snacks tucked into their pockets, a sense of adventure sparkling in their eyes as they dared each other to explore areas of the forest where adults seldom went. And at first it was all laughter and playful shouting as they raced between tree trunks, climbed low-hanging branches, and imagined themselves as explorers charting unknown lands. But as the hours passed and the sunlight began to waver, an uneasy silence began to creep in, replacing the cheerful noise with an almost tangible tension, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your stomach tighten. And then they noticed it, a faint whispering voice that seemed to move with the wind, drifting from one cluster of trees to the next, always just out of reach, repeating words they couldn't quite make out, yet unmistakably directed at them. And the bravest of the group, a boy named Ethan, laughed nervously, insisting it was just the wind playing tricks, or maybe a bird mimicking sounds, but the others weren't so sure, especially when the shadows between the trees seemed to shift unnaturally, stretching and bending in ways that defied explanation. And then came the first disappearance, subtle at first, a soft, muffled scream that was quickly stifled, leaving only the echo of panic bouncing between the trunks. And when the children turned to find their friend, he was gone, as if swallowed by the forest itself, leaving behind only a faint imprint in the soft earth where he had been standing moments before. And fear gripped the rest, their earlier excitement replaced by dread. Yet somehow, they continued to walk deeper into the woods, driven by a mix of disbelief, hope, and the stubbornness of youth. And with every step, the whispers grew louder, more distinct, shaping themselves into calls of their names, coaxing them, urging them to follow. And the forest, once a place of beauty and freedom, became a maze of terror, with every tree and shadow seeming alive, watching, waiting. And when they stumbled upon a clearing, it was empty except for the broken remains of an old treehouse, rotting and covered in moss, a place that should have seemed innocent yet emanated a cold, oppressive presence that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. And as they approached cautiously, the ground beneath them seemed to shift, roots writhing like serpents in the soil, and the whispers coalesced into full voices now, soft and urgent, warning them to turn back, to leave. But the children, frozen by fear and curiosity, took another step forward. and the sunlight that had been filtering through the trees began to fade, replaced by an unnatural twilight that made the forest appear older, darker, and infinitely larger than it had moments before. And then came the second disappearance, sudden and silent. A friend reaching out for another and vanishing into thin air, leaving only a stunned scream hanging in the air as the remaining children clutched each other, hearts pounding, realizing that something malevolent was at work, something that fed on fear, confusion, and the innocence of their play. And as panic set in, the forest seemed to stretch endlessly, paths looping back on themselves, trees forming barriers where none had existed, and the whispers became insistent, almost pleading, urging the children to follow certain paths, warning of dangers unseen. Yet even as they tried to obey, the shadows between the trees shifted, forming shapes that resembled the missing children, only to vanish the moment they blinked. And the longer they stayed, the more distorted the forest became, roots rising like spikes, branches clawing at their clothes, and the sunlight completely gone, leaving them in a dim, greenish twilight that seemed to come from the trees themselves, pulsating and alive, as though the forest had taken a breath and was now holding them in its grasp. And then came the final disappearance, the one that would haunt the survivors forever. A child turning to scream, a hand outstretched toward the others, and then nothing, swallowed into the forest with barely a sound, leaving behind only a deep, resonant echo that seemed to vibrate through the ground and into the bones. And the remaining children, now trembling, realized they were utterly alone yet surrounded, as if the trees themselves were observing, the whispers circling them like predators, offering false guidance, confusing them with sounds of their friends calling out, and every direction they ran, every path they tried to follow, seemed to bring them back to the same clearing, the broken treehouse looming above them like a silent sentinel. And when night finally fell, the forest came alive with sounds, low moans, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, and whispers now forming coherent words, telling stories of children who had vanished decades ago, warnings they had ignored, mistakes they were now doomed to repeat. And in that moment, fear became paralyzing, yet a strange, inexplicable compulsion drove them to move deeper, to see the truth for themselves, only to find more signs of the vanished, small toys, footprints in the dirt that led nowhere, broken bicycles, and eerie drawings carved into tree trunks. Messages they couldn't read but somehow understood, as if the forest had a memory, a history of trapping children and feeding on their curiosity and terror. And when dawn finally approached, pale light filtering weakly through the dense canopy, only a few children stumbled out, dazed, terrified, unable to fully explain what had happened. The memory of the vanished burned into their minds, their laughter of the morning replaced with a heavy silence. And even years later, every time they walked past Redwood woods, they felt the pull, the soft whispering in the wind, a reminder that the forest was alive, patient, and always waiting for the next group of children to wander too far, to play too carelessly, to vanish into its depths, leaving nothing behind but echoes, shadows, and the chilling certainty that some places are best left unexplored. For in Redwood, Oregon, the forest is not just trees and dirt. It is a living entity, ancient, malevolent, and insatiably hungry, a place where childhood curiosity can turn into nightmare, where playtime becomes a trap, and where the vanishing kids of Redwood are never truly gone, only waiting, whispering, and watching for those who dare to enter the woods.